The lady took that bowl of rice left over from Sunday lunch, put it in the microwave for 2.5 minutes, and served it to her husband. You did it with the affection of someone who doesn't want to waste food, with the practicality of someone who has cooked all your life and knows that tomorrow you will do it again. But inside that steam that rises from the plate, there is a chemical transformation that no one has ever explained to you. It's not about bacteria. It's not about spoiled food. It's about a change in the structure of food that your body no longer recognizes as food. And this silent change, repeated week after week, year after year, is linked to one of the most dreaded diagnoses I've ever had to give in the office: pancreatic cancer. My friends, those of you listening to me right now, I'm going to ask you to stay with me until the end, because what I'm going to reveal about 5 foods that you probably reheat every week can completely change the way you look at your kitchen. And the 5th food is something so innocent, so present on the Brazilian table, that when I finish explaining, you will remember all the times you did exactly what you shouldn't. When I say that the problem is bigger and quieter than it seems, I'm not talking about a temporary stomachache or a malaise that appears and disappears. I'm talking about a process that begins decades before the first symptom. The pancreas is a patient organ, my friends. He holds out in silence. He doesn't complain with a strong pain at first. He suffers in silence, inflammation after inflammation, until one day he can no longer hide the damage. And then, when the pain appears, when jaundice yellows the eyes, when the weight begins to fall without explanation, it is often too late. But what no one tells you is that some of that damage may be coming from a daily, almost automatic gesture you learned from your mother and grandmother: reheating food. It's not the act of cooking again that's the villain. This is what happens with certain types of food when they go through a second heating, especially when this heating is done quickly, without the care that the structure of the food requires. Over the next few minutes, I'll give you 2 things. First, I'll explain to you exactly what happens inside the cells of your pancreas when they come into contact with these substances transformed by reheating. And second, I'll show you the 5 foods that top this danger list, with a detail that will surprise you. Some of them are considered healthy, are recommended by nutritionists, but become a problem when you subject them to heat for the second time. Now, before I get into the specific foods, I need to tell you what happens in your body when you eat something that has undergone a profound change in its molecular structure. Imagine this. When you cook a food for the first time, you're breaking down fiber, softening proteins, releasing nutrients. It's a process that your body has recognized for thousands of years. But when you store that food in the refrigerator and then heat it up again, especially at high temperatures, and quickly, you're not just heating it up. You are inducing a second round of chemical reactions on a food matrix that has already been partially degraded. And that's where compounds that didn't exist in the original food come in. Compounds that your liver and pancreas didn't evolve to process. We are talking about substances that, when they enter the small intestine, trigger an inflammatory alarm. And the pancreas, my friends, is particularly sensitive to this alarm. Why? Because the pancreas has 2 main functions. One is to manufacture insulin, the hormone that controls blood sugar. The other is to manufacture very powerful digestive enzymes, capable of breaking down fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. These enzymes are so potent that the pancreas itself needs to protect itself from them so it doesn't digest itself. It is an organ that lives in a delicate balance. When a constant wave of foreign, aggressive compounds arrives from improperly reheated food, these enzymes can be activated within the pancreas itself, causing microlesions. And repeated micro-injuries, over years, create an environment of chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation is the breeding ground where abnormal cells begin to multiply. It's as if you poke a wound every single day. It never heals properly. And a wound that never heals can turn into something much more serious. This information is not new in medicine, but it is frighteningly neglected in office conversations, because the 15-minute consultation does not give time to explain this. The 15-minute consultation serves to measure blood pressure, listen to the heart, renew the prescription for diabetes medicine, and order routine tests. But it doesn't explain that the chemistry of your kitchen is as important as the chemistry of your blood. And this is where I pause, my friends, because I know some of you are listening to me while you prepare lunch or while you rest after eating. And I want you to think about the dimension of that. Each time you reheat certain foods the wrong way, you're not just eating a less nutritious meal. You are unknowingly forcing one of the most vital organs in your body to work against itself. And the worst thing is that the symptoms take so long to appear that you don't make the connection. That bloat after dinner, that heavy digestion that has become routine, that feeling of bloating that you attribute to age, all of this can be your pancreas asking for help. But he asks in a language that most people have not learned to hear. And doctors often treat these symptoms with drugs for heartburn, for gas, without investigating in depth what is causing the silent inflammation. Think of Mr. Antonio, a patient who marked me deeply. 68 years old, retired, widower. He cooked for himself. I made a big pot of brown rice on Sunday and ate it all week. I reheated it in the microwave, sometimes more than once, because it was practical. He also had the habit of making a large amount of sautéed vegetables and heating them up at each meal. Mr. Antonio did not drink, did not smoke, walked in the park 3 times a week. He was the portrait of the old man who did everything right. But he had a complaint, a nagging pain in his back, which came and went, and a tiredness that he swore was normal for his age. When the tests came, the marker of pancreatic inflammation was through the roof, and then we started to investigate his diet with a magnifying glass. What we discovered together is something I'm going to share with you now, and I'm going to ask you to pay close attention because the first food on the list is possibly the one you reheat the most in your house. Rice. Rice is a carbohydrate, basically starch. When you first cook rice, the starch absorbs water and swells. This is normal. But when you store cooked rice in the refrigerator, some of that starch goes through a process called retrogradation. It rearranges itself, forming crystals that are more resistant to digestion. So far, some studies suggest that resistant starch may have benefits for the intestinal flora. The problem starts when you reheat that rice unevenly, quickly, in the microwave. That intense, localized heat does not break down starch crystals evenly. Instead, it creates overheating points where starch begins to degrade into byproducts that overwhelm the pancreas. In addition, rice is a food that can carry spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus, which survive the initial cooking and multiply as the pot cools in the sink. Reheating rice in a mild way, without reaching a high and uniform temperature, does not destroy the toxins that this bacteria produces. And these toxins, when ingested, cause acute inflammation in the digestive system, which can indirectly affect the pancreas. But the main silent danger of reheated rice lies in a compound that forms when carbohydrates are subjected to high temperatures in the presence of proteins: acrylamide. Acrylamide is a substance that, in long-term studies, has been associated with damage to the genetic material of cells. And the pancreas, as an organ of high metabolic activity, is particularly vulnerable to this type of damage. Let me go deeper into this, because here's a detail that completely changes perception. Acrylamide is not an acute poison that will knock you down the next day. It acts like an unwanted visitor who enters your house and, little by little, scratches the walls, loosens the wires, wearing out the furniture. Inside your body, it interacts with the DNA of pancreatic cells, causing small glitches when these cells divide. One failure here, another there. Most of these flaws are repaired by your own defense system. But over the years, with repeated exposure, one of these flaws may escape repair. And when a cell with a DNA failure begins to multiply unchecked, my friends, that's the beginning of a tumor. What makes rice particularly insidious is that it is a dry, porous food, which in the microwave heats up completely irregularly. Some parts are burned, others remain cold. And to compensate, the person puts in another minute, then another 30 seconds. Each microwave pulse over the already cooked rice is a new opportunity for acrylamide to form in the spots that were already hot. Donna Lucia, another patient of mine, 72 years old, used to make loose rice and store it in the refrigerator in a plastic jar. She took out the jar, put it in the microwave, and heated it until smoke came out. The rice was sometimes a little rubbery, sometimes with hard parts. She ate anyway. When she began to experience frequent nausea and a loss of appetite that made her lose 8 kilos in 3 months, the family thought it was depression, but it was the chronically inflamed pancreas. I talked at length with Donna Lucia about the way she reheated the rice. She looked at me with teary eyes and said, "Doctor, I've done this my whole life, and that's exactly why I'm here talking to you right now." And there's more. Rice, when reheated in the microwave inside plastic jars, gains an extra aggravating factor. Plastic, even one that claims to be BPA-free, when heated, releases hormone-mimicking compounds in the human body. These compounds, called endocrine disruptors, interfere with insulin signaling, forcing the pancreas to work even harder. It's a perfect storm. The rice damaged by the irregular reheating plus the compounds from the heated plastic, both of which require a response from the pancreas that it wasn't designed to give. Watch this carefully. It's not just white rice. Brown rice, as recommended as it is healthy, is even more dangerous when reheated. Do you know why? Because brown rice has an outer layer rich in natural oils and fiber. These oils, when subjected to the second heating, oxidize. And the oxidation of these oils generates the same lipid peroxides that I mentioned, and that directly attack the membranes of the cells of the pancreas. The fiber, which is beneficial at first cooking, becomes a trap on reheating, because it retains heat unevenly and creates pockets of overheating where degradation is more intense. So, that brown rice that you prepared so carefully on Sunday, thinking about your health, may be turning into an inflammatory agent throughout the week. And the common mistake that cancels out the benefit is precisely this: thinking that, because the food is healthy in origin, it remains healthy after 3 days in the refrigerator and 2 minutes in the microwave. Health is not only in what you eat, but in the history that this food lived until it reached your fork. And here, my friends, I open a gap for the second food, which will make you rethink the lunchbox you take to work or prepare for your grandchild to take to school. Because if rice has already lit an alert, what I'm going to say now about potatoes will make you look at that creamy mash or that baked potato with a completely new awareness. The second food that raises a huge alert in my office is potatoes. The boiled, baked, or fried potato that you save and reheat. Potatoes are rich in a type of starch that, when it cools and is reheated, undergoes changes that go beyond retrogradation. What happens is that during reheating at high temperatures, especially in ovens, air fryers, or microwaves, the sugars present in the potato react with amino acids, forming a cascade of compounds called advanced glycation end products. These products have complicated names, but what you need to know is that they are highly inflammatory. They bind to receptors on the cells of the pancreas and trigger an inflammatory response that, over time, can compromise both insulin production and tissue integrity. Imagine tiny chemical needles poking at the walls of your organs every time you eat a serving of reheated potatoes. It's not an exaggerated image. It is a visual description of what inflammatory molecules do at the microscopic level. And the cruelest detail is that potatoes are seen as a homemade, simple, comforting food. No one suspects her. Let's go deeper now, because the potato holds a secret that very few people know. When you cook the potato and let it cool slowly in the pan at room temperature, a phenomenon that scientists call starch gelatinization occurs. Starch absorbs water and forms a network, a gel. So far, normal. But when that cold potato goes into the microwave, the water that was trapped in this net evaporates explosively. Starch, without water, collapses and forms a hard crystalline structure. This structure is very resistant to digestive enzymes. When it reaches the intestine, the pancreas receives the signal that there is too much starch to be digested and increases the production of enzymes. But enzymes can't efficiently break down these crystals, and the pancreas keeps producing more and more enzymes in an effort that is never rewarded. This state of enzyme hyperproduction causes oxidative stress within the pancreas itself. And oxidative stress is one of the main drivers of carcinogenic transformation. It's as if you stepped on the accelerator of a stationary car, forcing the engine without moving from its place. At some point, the engine blows. Most people think they're making a safe choice when they heat up that leftover mashed potato from lunch. But puree, in particular, is a hazard because it has been whipped, aerated. In puree, the fat from the milk and butter mixes closely with the starch. When this mixture is reheated, the fat reaches very high temperatures in localized spots, while the surrounding starch is still warm. This temperature difference causes the fat to oxidize and form lipid peroxides, while starch forms advanced glycation products. That is, in the same fork of reheated puree, you have two types of inflammatory substances acting in synergy, and the pancreas receives this double impact. My patient, Mr. Roberto, 65 years old, had the habit of taking lunch to work for years. His lunchbox always had potatoes, because he liked to feel that substance. He reheated in the microwave in the office every day. When he retired, he continued with the habit. At 67, he was diagnosed with chronic pancreatitis. The question he asked me, sitting in front of me with a choked voice, was, "Doctor, what did I do wrong?" And the answer was in the lunchbox he carried with so much zeal for decades. But Mr. Roberto's case has a detail that I have never forgotten. He didn't just reheat the potato, he reheated the potato along with a piece of meat, forming a combination that further enhanced the damage. The fat in the meat, when reheated, released compounds that interacted with potato products, creating an inflammatory cocktail that no single study could predict. And that's how real life works. No one eats one food at a time. The combinations we make on the plate can multiply the harmful effects. Now pay attention to this detail. Sweet potatoes, often recommended as a healthy alternative to potatoes, do not escape this problem. On the contrary, sweet potatoes have more natural sugars. When reheated, these sugars caramelize quickly, and if the heat is intense, they char. The carbonization of sugars generates substances called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are known to be carcinogenic. And once again, the pancreas, with its metabolic sensitivity, is a preferred target. The difference is that sweet potatoes, because they are more moist, are often reheated for longer, because the person wants to feel that soft texture. And the longer it is in the heat, the greater the production of these compounds. And here is the mistake that cancels out the benefit. Many people cook sweet potatoes in quantity, store them in the refrigerator, and reheat them throughout the week, thinking they are having a healthy snack. And indeed, freshly cooked sweet potatoes are an excellent food. But sweet potatoes reheated 3-4 times completely lose their protective value and become a source of chemical aggression. It's as if you had a medicine that, taken in the right dose, cures. But if you boiled that medicine every time before taking it, it turned into poison. Chemistry is sensitive. Heat is a powerful transformer. Think of Mrs. Noosa, 61 years old. She discovered sweet potatoes on a television show and started eating them every day. I baked several at once in the oven on Sunday and kept them. In the morning, I took one, cut it in half, and put it in the air fryer for 10 minutes. The result was a potato with a dark skin, sometimes with burnt spots, but with a sweet smell that she loved. But Mrs. Noosa began to notice that, after eating, she felt a burning in the pit of her stomach that lasted for hours. She went to the doctor, who prescribed a gastric protector. But the problem was not the stomach. The problem was the pancreas, which was already showing signs of exhaustion. When we adjusted the way she prepared the sweet potato, the symptoms disappeared within 3 weeks. Her body was not sick. Her body was reacting to a daily chemical aggression that she was unknowingly imposing on him. Now, I'm going to take a necessary break. If you've been listening to me this far, you've already understood that this is not an ordinary video about food. This is a warning based on your body's real mechanisms, which most doctors don't have time to explain. And I want to ask you something that's important to me. If this content is illuminating something inside you, if it is bringing you clarity about what you feel but have never been able to name, leave your like. It's not for me. It is so that this information reaches more people. Subscribe to this channel because I have so much more to share about what actually happens inside your body. And comment below which city you are listening to me from. I read every comment, and it's a joy to know that we're building a community of people who refuse to be passive patients. Now tell me, have you ever felt any discomfort after eating reheated potatoes or rice? Comment there, because what comes next will make you completely rethink something that is in your kitchen cabinet right now. The third food is vegetable oils. More specifically, the act of reheating preparations that contain oils such as soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, and even olive oil, depending on the temperature. When you fry a steak or sauté vegetables in oil for the first time, the oil already oxidizes. Some unsaturated fats are transformed into trans fats and toxic aldehydes, but when you store the food with that oil and reheat everything the next day, oxidation enters a second, much more aggressive phase. The compounds that form in this second round are called lipid peroxides. They're like fat-like free radicals navigating through your bloodstream. And guess which organ is one of the main targets of these lipid peroxides? The pancreas. Because the pancreas is rich in cell membranes composed of lipids. These membranes are like the skin of cells. When lipid peroxides encounter them, they react with them, damaging their structure, as if eroding the protective layer of pancreatic cells. This triggers a repair response that, if constantly triggered, leads to disordered cell multiplication. And disordered cell multiplication is the beginning of the carcinogenic process. I want to deepen this point, because it is central and is often misunderstood. The membrane of a cell is not an inert wall. It is a living, intelligent structure that controls what comes in and what goes out. It is made of fats, mainly phospholipids. When a lipid peroxide approaches this membrane, it reacts with the phospholipids, setting off a chain reaction. A damaged phospholipid damages the neighbor, which damages the next, and so on. It's like a row of dominoes falling. The cell notices the attack and tries to repair itself. But if the attack is constant, the repair is never complete. The cell is in a state of permanent alert, producing inflammatory substances that attract defense cells. These defense cells, in turn, release more oxidative substances to fight what they interpret as an aggression, and the cycle feeds back. Within this inflamed environment, pancreatic cells divide more quickly to replace those that have been damaged, and the more cell divisions, the greater the chance of a DNA error. It is a biochemical Russian roulette that happens billions of times throughout life. Think of Mrs. Fatima, 75 years old. She loved making homemade pastries for her grandchildren. He fried a batch on Saturday and kept the leftovers. During the week, she reheated those pastries in the air fryer or in the oven. The meat filling and the oil of the dough together went through a third or fourth heating, depending on how many times she repeated the process. Donna Fatima never smoked, never drank soda, but she began to have episodes of abdominal pain that went to her back. Tests showed precancerous lesions in the pancreas, lesions that, according to the specialists who accompanied her, could be related to years of silent chemical aggression from food. The common mistake that negates the benefit of using healthy oils is precisely this: subjecting the oil to multiple heating cycles. Even extra virgin olive oil, which is a treasure of the Mediterranean diet, can form harmful compounds if it is reheated to very high temperatures repeatedly. The key is not to demonize food, but to understand the moment when it stops being an ally and becomes an aggressive agent within your body. And here is a detail that almost no one explains, but which is fundamental. Extra virgin olive oil is rich in polyphenols, substances that protect the heart and brain. These polyphenols are sensitive to heat. At first cooking, some of them degrade, but many remain. In reheating, degradation is much more intense. Olive oil loses its protective properties and, worse, the fragments of the degraded polyphenols can recombine into compounds that did not exist before, and whose effects on the human body are still poorly understood. What research suggests is that these fragments may have inflammatory activity, the exact opposite of fresh olive oil. So when you use olive oil to sauté a vegetable, store it in the fridge, and reheat it the next day, you're no longer consuming olive oil. You are consuming a transformed product, which has lost its virtues and gained potential risks, and the pancreas, once again, is one of the first to feel it. Now I want you to imagine the scene. You made a baked fish with olive oil and herbs. Half was left. You store it in the fridge, and the next lunch you put it in the microwave. The oil that was on the platter bubbles reaches very high temperatures locally. Herbs burn. Fish, which is a delicate protein, undergoes the aggregation I mentioned, and you consume this dish believing that you are eating well. This is the silent betrayal of the modern kitchen. The industry sold us the convenience of the microwave and reheated food as a breakthrough. But no one explained to us the biochemical price of this convenience. And the health system, focused on treating diseases already installed, has no structure to prevent what starts decades earlier inside its kitchen. The fourth food on our list is one that many people consider lean, healthy protein, and that is in the lunchbox of almost everyone looking for a better diet: chicken. Specifically, the reheated chicken. Chicken meat is rich in protein. When you cook chicken for the first time, the proteins denature. That is, they open up, rearrange, and become easier to digest. So far, so good. But when you store chicken in the refrigerator and then reheat it, especially at high temperatures and for an extended time, these already denatured proteins undergo a second transformation. They clump together in a way that the enzymes in your stomach and pancreas have a hard time breaking down. This generates partially digested protein fragments that reach the small intestine in a state that the immune system can interpret as invaders. These fragments can cross the intestinal barrier, especially if the person already has some intestinal permeability, which is common with age, and fall into the bloodstream. Once in the blood, these fragments can trigger a systemic inflammatory reaction. And once again, the pancreas is on the front line, because it's called upon to produce extra enzymes to try to deal with these tough fragments, It's as if you put a stone inside a grinder. The grinder pushes, and ends up breaking. The pancreas forces the production of enzymes, and the result is microlesions in the pancreatic ducts. Let's expand on this mechanism, because it's fascinating and scary at the same time. Proteins are long chains of amino acids, folded into specific three-dimensional shapes. Baking unfolds these chains. Reheating bends them again, but in the wrong way, forming disorganized balls that enzymes can't attack. These balls are called protein aggregates. When they reach the intestine, they are not recognized as food. The intestinal immune system, which is the largest in the body, identifies them as potential threats and mounts a response. This response includes the release of inflammatory cytokines, which are chemical messengers that travel through the blood and can reach the pancreas. There, they activate inflammatory pathways that chronically contribute to cell transformation. In addition, protein fragments that fall into the bloodstream can deposit in distant tissues, including the pancreas, where they trigger a local immune reaction. It is as if the body is fighting an infection that does not exist, causing collateral damage to the tissues themselves. My patient, Mr. Claudio, 58 years old, an amateur bodybuilder, ate chicken and sweet potatoes every single day. He prepared the week's meals on Sunday, froze them, and thawed and reheated them in the microwave throughout the days. His chicken went through 2, sometimes 3 cycles of freezing and heating. He had an impeccable physique, perfect cholesterol and glucose tests. But persistent pain in his upper abdomen led him to the gastroenterologist, who found pancreatic cysts forming. Cysts that, according to doctors, were incompatible with his apparently healthy lifestyle. But they made perfect sense when we analyzed the chemistry of what he ate every day. The betrayal of the system is there. You could be doing everything the health media says you should do, eating lean chicken, avoiding fried foods, and still be silently sabotaging your pancreas because of the way you prepare and store that food. And there is an aggravating factor that I want you to understand. Chicken is often seasoned with garlic, onion, paprika, herbs. These spices in themselves are beneficial. But when subjected to reheating, they also transform. Garlic, for example, contains sulfur compounds that, at first cooking, have anti-inflammatory properties. On rewarming, these compounds oxidize and can form byproducts that irritate the intestinal mucosa. Onions, rich in quercetin, undergo similar degradation. The combination of poorly aggregated proteins with oxidized spices creates a food bolus that the stomach and intestine have difficulty processing. The pancreas is recruited to produce more enzymes, and the stress cycle intensifies. Think about the number of seasoned chicken lunchboxes that are prepared on Sunday and consumed until Friday. Every day is a new cycle of pancreatic stress. And since the chicken is lean, the person thinks they are making the best possible choice. This is the mistake that cancels out the benefit, confusing the quality of fresh food with the quality of food after multiple thermal cycles. Now, before I get to the 5th and most surprising food, I want you to take a brief mental break. I want you to imagine your kitchen, open the fridge mentally, look at the bowls, identify what's there, waiting to be reheated. Yesterday's rice, soup potato, the lunch chicken, the vegetable stew with olive oil. All of this now has a new meaning for you. You can no longer look at these pots as before. And this is no reason to despair. It is a reason for empowerment. Because now you know. And knowing is the first step to change. What I'm going to reveal next is the food that surprises the most, because it's the heart of the Brazilian table. And the damage it can do when reheated repeatedly is something that will make you completely reevaluate your habits. And then we come to the 5th food, and I would ask you to take a deep breath now, because this is the most surprising, the most revolting, and the most revealing of how incomplete the information you have received all your life has been. The 5th food is beans. Yes, the beans, our daily beans, the partner of rice, the soul of Brazilian food. Beans are a legume rich in protein, fiber, and complex carbohydrates. When you first cook beans, you're hydrating the beans, disrupting cell walls, inactivating anti-nutritional factors like lectins. But cooked beans are also a perfect environment for microorganisms to proliferate if they are not cooled quickly. And the problem with reheated beans is not only in the possible contamination, but in the transformation of their own components. When you reheat the beans, especially that thick broth that has already been boiled once, the complex carbohydrates begin to break down into simpler sugars, which caramelize and then burn locally in the hot spots, generating the same inflammatory substances I mentioned in potatoes. In addition, Bean proteins, as well as those in chicken, undergo secondary aggregation. But the astonishing detail of beans is that they contain purines. Purines are natural substances that, in the body, are metabolized into uric acid. High uric acid, in addition to causing gout, is a potent inflammatory factor for blood vessels and the pancreas. When the bean is reheated, the concentration of purines available for absorption can increase, because the second cooking breaks down the cell walls even more, releasing purines that were previously less accessible. This means that the reheated bean broth can be a bomb of concentrated purines, which overload the metabolism and inflame the pancreas. Let's dive deeper into this mechanism, because beans are such a rich and complex food that they deserve careful analysis. The bean kernel is made up of layers. The outer shell is rich in fiber. The interior is rich in starch and protein. Inside the cells of the bean, purines are part of the genetic material, DNA and RNA. When you cook the beans, the cells open up and release these purines into the broth. When first cooking, the amount released is controlled by the cooking time. But when you reheat the beans, especially if you boil them again hard, the cells that resisted the first cooking rupture, releasing a second batch of purines. In addition, repeated boiling reduces the volume of the broth, concentrating the purines that were already there. The result is a much purine-dense broth than the original bean, and purines in the body turn into uric acid. Excess uric acid doesn't just cause gout in the joints. It also deposits in microcrystals in soft tissues, and the pancreas is one of the places where these microcrystals can lodge. These crystals irritate the pancreatic tissue, generating chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation, as we've seen, is the birthplace of cancer. But it doesn't stop there. Beans also contain soluble fibers that, at first cooking, form a gel that helps control blood sugar. On reheating, this gel can break down into smaller fragments that do not have the same beneficial effect. Worse, these fragments can ferment excessively in the intestine, generating gas and distension. This excessive fermentation alters intestinal permeability, allowing inflammatory substances to cross the intestinal barrier and reach the pancreas. It is an indirect but real effect. And the common mistake that cancels out the benefit is this: letting the pot of beans cool slowly on the stove for hours, then storing it in the refrigerator, and the next day boiling again only the part you are going to consume, repeating this for 4-5 days. With each boil, the broth reduces, the purines concentrate, the proteins denature once again, and the carbohydrates form a brownish paste that sticks to the bottom of the pot, rich in charred compounds that are highly carcinogenic to the pancreas. Mr. Francisco, an 80-year-old man, ate reheated beans practically every day of his adult life. He used to make a huge pot on Monday and eat until Saturday. I reheated it on the stove, let it boil a lot because I liked the broth thick. He never had diabetes, controlled pressure, but a routine imaging test revealed a tumor in the head of the pancreas. The surgery was complex, and during the recovery, the nutrition team explained to the family what I am explaining to you now. His daughter told me years later that no one had ever warned about the reheated beans. No one. And she grew up watching her father do it, repeated the same pattern in her house, and only stopped after the scare. The case of Mr. Francisco is emblematic because he did not have any classic risk factors. He didn't drink, smoke, didn't eat sausages, had no family history. The only eating habit that stood out was the pot of beans reheated for days. And when the doctors went to investigate in depth, they found markers of oxidative stress in the tumor tissue that are compatible with chronic exposure to carbonized compounds and concentrated purines. And there's more. Black beans, so traditional in Brazil, have a concentration of anthocyanins, which are antioxidant pigments. On first cooking, these anthocyanins protect the body, but on reheating, they degrade into smaller phenolic compounds. Some of these compounds can, in excess, have a pro-oxidant effect. That is, instead of protecting, they oxidize. It's an ironic twist. The same pigment that gives beans their dark color and that fresh is good can become an oxidizing agent when mistreated by repeated heat. The body is not silly. He evolved to consume freshly prepared food. The practice of reheating several times is a recent invention in human history, from the last 50-60 years. And our pancreas, which has spent thousands of years adapting to a diet of fresh or cooked foods only once, has not had the evolutionary time to learn how to deal with these new compounds. Now, my friends, this changes everything. Because if you think about it, most of the guidance you received on food focused on counting calories, cutting fat, measuring sugar. But no one, in decades of consultations, has explained that the problem is not only in the type of food, but in the history that this food carries. A food that has been prepared with love, but has spent too much time at the wrong temperature, that has been aggressively reheated, that has had its chemistry altered, that food becomes a stranger to your body. And the body responds to this stranger with inflammation. Inflammation that does not show up in common blood tests. Inflammation that doesn't wake you up at dawn with pain. Inflammation that silently erodes, layer by layer, the health of your organs. The pancreas, my friends, is like a delicate sponge, full of very fine channels through which enzymes pass. When this sponge is repeatedly bathed in aggressive compounds from reheated food, the channels become irritated. The cells that cover them begin to multiply to repair themselves, and in this disordered process of repair, the mutation arises. The mutation that can lead to cancer. This is not theory, it's physiology, it's chemistry, it's cell biology at its most fundamental level. And the most tragic thing is that the health system, the way it is set up, does not have time to teach you this. The consultation serves to prescribe pain medicine, order a CT scan when the tumor is already large, refer to the oncologist when options are already limited. But the consultation does not teach you to look at the pot of beans on the stove with different eyes. It doesn't teach you to smell the reheated rice and know that there may be something there that your body no longer wants to receive. And here, I want to take an emotional break. I want you to think about how many times throughout your life you've gotten up from your desk with that feeling of heaviness, of bloating, and simply attributed it to age. How many times have you looked in the mirror and seen a tiredness that didn't exist before, a pallor, a subtle yellowing in your eyes that you ignored? How many times have you felt a little pain in your back on the left side and thought it was bad posture or an old mattress? The pancreas speaks through these subtle signals, but as no one teaches us to listen to it, we live with the warnings until the cry arrives in the form of a diagnosis. My friends, every mouthful of food carelessly reheated is a missed opportunity to give your body what it really needs. Food that is still recognized as such. It's not about stopping eating what's left. It's about understanding how to store and how to reheat to preserve the life that exists in the food. Think about the dimension of this. Every week that passes without this information is a week in which you, through no fault of your own, may be hurting an organ that doesn't know how to ask for help. And you may be doing it with the best of intentions, feeding your family with what's left, avoiding waste, keeping with tradition. But the truth I need to tell you with all due respect and with all the affection is that the waste that really threatens your life is not the food that goes to waste. It is the health that goes away in silence while you reheat what you shouldn't. And now, after all that I have explained, I want you to understand that there is a way out. It's not about throwing away all the leftover food. It's not about being afraid of your own kitchen. It is about understanding how to handle these foods so that they continue to be a source of life and not disease. Rice can be stored for up to 24 hours in the refrigerator and eaten cold in salads or reheated only once over low heat with a little water, stirring constantly until it is evenly hot, never in the microwave. If you use a microwave, put a lid on your own, a spoonful of water, and stir halfway through to distribute the heat. The potato can be eaten cold as a salad or reheated in the oven at a moderate temperature, wrapped in aluminum foil to avoid heat peaks. Avoid microwaving potatoes, especially those already cut. Vegetable oils should never be reheated. If you have fried something, discard the oil or consume the food cold. If you're storing a stir-fry, try to separate the excess oil before storing. The chicken should be shredded and reheated in moisture, that is, with a little water or sauce to avoid drying out and excessive protein aggregation. And the beans, our beloved beans, should be cooled quickly after cooking, preferably in smaller portions, and each serving should be reheated only once at a simmer without letting the broth reduce until it burns. If possible, freeze individual portions and thaw only what you will consume in that meal. These are simple adaptations, but they can make a monumental difference in the amount of inflammatory compounds that enter your body over the years. And I want you to come out of this video not with fear, but with power. The power to make informed decisions about what you put on your plate. The power to protect your pancreas with the same care you protect your heart, your lungs. The power of looking at the steam that rises from the pan and understanding that inside there is a chemistry that you know today. And knowledge, my friends, is the purest form of autonomy. It's what no one can take away from you. It is what transforms a passive patient who only receives orders into an active human being who understands his body and dialogues with it. I remember every patient who passed by me who, when receiving a difficult diagnosis, asked the same question: "Doctor, what could I have done differently?" And often the answer lay not in a medicine that was not taken, but in a habit that was never questioned. A habit that passed from generation to generation as an invisible legacy of love and care, but which carried within it a seed of risk. When you change this habit, you're not just taking care of yourself. He is rewriting that legacy for his children, his grandchildren, his nephews. He is saying, in my house, the tradition is now the tradition of knowledge. And that's more valuable than any family recipe. When you share this video with a brother, with a friend, with a child, you're not marketing to me. You're taking care of the one you love in a way that goes beyond a hug. You are delivering information that can literally save a life. Because pancreatic cancer is one of the quietest and most lethal that exists. And if there's a chance to prevent it by changing how we reheat our food, that chance needs to be spread. So I ask you, from the heart, send this video to someone you know who makes Sunday feijoada and eats it all week. Someone who takes a lunchbox with chicken every day. Someone who, like Mr. Antonio, like Mrs. Lucia, like Mr. Francisco, is doing the best he can, not knowing that small adjustments can protect his pancreas for the rest of his life. And if you know someone who has had a pancreas scare, or who simply deserves to know about it, don't keep this information to yourself. Shared wisdom is the most powerful medicine a community can have. Take care of yourself, take care of your own, and never look at the reheated dish the same way again.